Eurasian steppe. Nomadic tribes have populated the steppe since prehistoric times. The territory expands out over 5,000 kilometers and serves as a migratory passage between Europe and Asia. It stretches out between ice-cold oceans to its north and arid desert to its south, ending at the Altai Mountains. "2,500 years ago, Scythian pioneers navigated this natural frontier in a bid to conquer Asia. Not much is known about this mysterious group of people who inhabited the steppe. Today, their tombs are the only indication of their ephemeral domination over these mountain slopes. What treasures can be found in their graves? What can we learn about these horseback conquerors? How can they help us understand present-day nomadic populations? What similarities exist in spite of a 2,000-year time difference? An archaeological operation is underway. The researchers are braving the elements in an attempt to discover as much as they can from these tombs before they are permanently lost due to climate change. They are running out of time. Global warming is causing the ice tombs to disappear. They represent the last remaining doorway that connects us to the Altai Mountain Scythian culture. Archaeologists hope that it is not too late to make new discoveries. The road that leads to the excavation site is very long. The site is located in the extreme west of Mongolia, one of the most isolated regions of the world. It takes 5 days for us to get from Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, to the Sirgal Valley, 2,300 meters above sea level. Extreme weather conditions in the region mean that access is only possible in summer. The project will last for 6 weeks, and the team will be completely cut off from the world. Pierre-Henri Giscard, from the Institute of Deserts and Steppes, is leading this Franco-Mongol expedition, alongside Sagan Turbat from the Institute of Archaeology in the Mongolian Academy of Sciences. Their goal is to shed new light on the culture and civilization of the Oriental Scythians.
Scythian civilization encompassed several groups that expanded over the Eurasian steppe from the 7th to the 3rd century BC. They each had their own culture and characteristics and were independent of each other, yet similar enough to be grouped together as Scythians. Anthropologically speaking, they were Caucasian, but they weren't what we would define as white. They spoke Iranian and many other languages. We do not know how they identified themselves because the source of information of Scythian origin is limited. They didn't read or write and were therefore unable to know how the different groups defined each other.
The Scythian groups interacted with their neighboring sedentary civilizations, ancient Greece and the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Different cultures existed within the Scythian groups. Most of our knowledge about the Scythian culture concerns the royal Scythians, who lived north of the Black Sea. In around 400 BC, ancient Greek historian Herodotus gave a detailed description of their existence. However, we don't have much information about the Eastern Scythians who lived on the other side of this expansive territory.
The Siberian and Mongolian Scythian populations in the Altai region were also referred to as the Pazyryks, as it is the name of the main site that has been excavated. Many items have been found and everything has been extremely well preserved. However, not much is known about the owners of these objects.
The archaeologists have selected 2 tombs to excavate. They contain an abundance of relics, and the team is hoping to discover ritual objects and bodies in an exceptional state of preservation. The stakes are high. They want to lift the veil on this unknown civilization that was established in the Altai region between 500 and 300 BC.
The surface is intact. It doesn't look like the tomb has been raided. They now need to establish if there's any ice inside the chamber, if it is intact. This depends on the altitude. We're about 2,004 meters above sea level, so that helps. But it also depends on the depth. The soil here is compact and they weren't able to dig any deeper. We're not sure if they'll be able to dig more than 3 meters into the earth.
These piles of stone and rocks are called kurgans. They were put in place to prevent looting. Only people of certain social status were buried. The formation of the kurgans is symbolic. Their circular form represents the sun. The Scythians were sun worshippers. But why have they frozen? In summer, rainwater penetrates the piles of rocks and seeps into the ground. During permafrost conditions, the temperature falls below zero, and this water turns to ice. A burial depth of at least 3 meters is required for the burial chamber to be frozen. The rock piles act as a heat shield. This fascinating phenomenon is under threat. If a tomb thaws, even for a short period of time, it triggers an irreversible decomposition of the surrounding organic matter.
For a long time, it was assumed that 2,500 years ago, the Altai region was a frontier. Not in a physical sense. The mountains reach up to 3,000 to 3,500 meters above sea level and can be navigated during the summer period. It was thought that it was a barrier in the ethnical sense, with people of European origin on the western side and people of Mongolian origin on the eastern side. However, we are now discovering that certain groups of people crossed this barrier and settled here for over 2 centuries.
The mission is taking place far off the beaten track, and this makes it impossible to use mechanical diggers. Everything is done manually. However, the archaeologists are progressing rapidly because the soil that sits above the permafrost crumbles easily.
How deep is it at the deepest point over there?
2 meters.
2 meters.
We probably need to dig for 1 more meter.
Ah, yes.
Otherwise, we've got a problem.
Yes, absolutely. What's this? What's this? Bone? It's completely straight. It's amazing. This is the first time in Mongolia, in the Pazyryk tombs, that we have found a group of slaughtered horses in one grave.
According to Herodotus, when Scythian leaders died, their horses were sacrificed. Their bodies were placed above the burial chambers. The Scythians worshipped horses. It was here in this steppe, 4,000 years ago, that horses were domesticated for the first time. The Scythians rode without stirrups or saddles. This control gave them a significant advantage over their enemies. They launched attacks at full gallop and were able to shoot arrows with tremendous efficiency. Their horses were their companions for life, and when they died, they followed them to their final resting place. The number of horses that were sacrificed depended on the social status of the deceased. They sacrificed old or injured horses that were useless to the community.
Be careful.
This is its mandible. It had beautiful teeth. It was an adult horse. It's somewhat bizarre to think that we are in the process of extracting teeth from a 2,500-year-old horse, while just over there are some Kazakhs with their horses. It's like we're frozen in time, and the past is catching up with the present.
A nomadic family has settled near the burial area. The Kazakhs mainly populate western Mongolia. They found refuge here in the 19th century after the Tsar armies annexed Kazakhstan. They have followed the same migration paths that the Pazriks took through the Altai Mountains, and they follow a very traditional lifestyle. Are these two cultures that live 2,500 years apart inextricably linked? This is an important issue for researchers, as this connection could enable them to validate their archaeological assumptions. An ethnological study could help elucidate their archaeological research.
Is she shocked and upset that the graves are being dug up?
Мына кісілер нақсап енді мықтың үйін бүйтіп қазып ашып жүрсе сонда сізге енді қандай бір жаман сезім туды ма?
Сосын біз өзімізше қуанып отырмыз енді. Ой, Құдай ауылымыздың жанынан түк шықпай кетіп қалса да кетіп қалады. Оның қасында аман есен іздегендерін тауып алған енді әбден ғой деп ойлап отыр. Тәңір жалғасын. Қайда жүрсеңдер аман жүріңдер.
Christoph Mullera, an archaeological leather and textile expert from the K. Bronley Museum, joined the project to study Kazakh technical craft and to make comparisons with the artifacts found in the tombs.
He's softening it. This technique dates back over the centuries and is still used today.
His father told him how to do it.
The skin has been cut into strips and then softened in a mixture of water and then yogurt. Many leather items have been found in the tombs. They've been well preserved, which means that they were treated with care. This explains why they withstood 2,000 years underground.
Осындай нәрселер қайдан тауып алады? Өздері сатып дайын сатып аласыз?
Дайын ала салады. Ендігі Қытайдың жібі, мәтік жатқы деген сияқты. Мынандай қайсыз деген елді қовыртып кетті.
This area is like a cultural academy. It's the only place in the world where authentic Kazakh culture remains. But how long will it last? Is there really a link between the people here and what we found in the tombs? They are in one way or another descendants of the people that lived here. This is great. It's intact. This snaffle bit is in a good condition. It can be restored. The joint is typical of Scythian craft. We can see that it was struck between the eyes. This seems to suggest that the horse was taken alive. It appears to have been killed by a blow to the forehead. I'm sure that it was one of the most solemn moments of the funeral. It's magnificent. These two griffins are made out of wood. They embellish the horse's harness. Wood rots in humid atmosphere, but this has been preserved in a dry environment. This rare wood sculpture has lasted for over 2,500 years. These are the kinds of items that we see in books. If this was to be left in the sun for a few hours, it would be destroyed. We're going to dampen it, wrap it in special packaging, and fly it to Paris.
These objects will be restored in France, then returned to the Institute of Archaeology in the Mongolian Academy of Sciences, and then exhibited in the National Museum of Mongolia. Eastern Scythian art is very refined, as shown by these lilies that adorn the horse harness, or these griffins, legendary creatures represented by an eagle's body on a lion's back with horse ears and a serpent's tail. The resonance with Greek and Persian mythology confirms the cultural links with the Scythians that settled here, despite the prejudices against them.
Non-nomadic people have long considered nomads to be barbarous, uncivilized, and stuck in the past. This image is based on the notion of deficiency. Nomadic people do not have houses, they do not have fields, they do not have cities. They are often considered to be predators, lurking on the edges of a civilization that has all of these things. In reality, 20th century archaeological research has revealed that this isn't quite the case. It seems that at the beginning of 1000 BC, certain sedentary populations gave up their fixed habitat and farmland in order to engage in extensive agriculture and to make the most of the opportunities offered by the expansive steppe terrain.
En exploitant au mieux les possibilités qu'offrait le milieu steppique.
It's summertime, and the project team is living in similar conditions to those of the people that they are studying.
It's amazing to think that they cooked using stones, just like in the Neolithic period. The only thing that was different is that at the time there were no metal containers and they cooked in a pouch made out of goat skin. Their saucepans were made out of goat skin.
After 2 weeks of grueling excavation, the archaeologists have almost reached the first tomb. The burial chamber is only a few centimeters beneath their feet, and the tension is palpable. Is the tomb still frozen?
It's hollow. This is the burial chamber.
Ice.
Excellent, real ice.
De la vraie glace.
We've removed all the protective layers of soil.
If we don't work quickly, the ice will melt and the organic components will dissolve.
It's a race against the clock. It's imperative that we close it up again as quickly as possible. We must call Ulaanbaatar immediately.
We found a tomb with ice. You must start immediately with a frigorific truck.
Day and night.
So quick as possible. And drive in the night also. Drive in the night.
The work has been suspended. Excavation exposes organic matter to a sudden change in temperature and can cause decomposition. The archaeologists have to wait for a refrigerated truck. Tension is mounting.
Well, the best case scenario is that the ice has been there since the burial. If this is the case, we'll be able to examine the body and the gene structure and make a paleopathological diagnosis. We would be able to find out what they died of. It looks like the tomb has been frozen. We'll soon find out.
Day 3. The refrigerated truck still hasn't arrived. Professor Turbat is impatient and investigating some information that was given to him by a Kazakh shepherd. He has been directed to the site of some rock carvings in a cliff face a few hundred meters from the Surgal burial site. These carvings are known as petroglyphs. Before writing, these symbols were the main form of expression for the people living on the steppe.
La période bronze,
The Bronze Age and the Pazyryk era.
An extraordinary artistic dialogue has been carved into the cliff face. Over 1,000 years after the Bronze Age, the Scythian use of animal art clearly had a significant role to play in terms of communication.
This is a horseman in the Pazyryk period. He's riding without stirrups. The archaeologists are fascinated by the animal art. It is one of our main resources of information about these populations. We don't have any written records, but we have these representations. Their function is not just aesthetic. They communicate concepts, ideas, and myths. We can deduce from these carvings that the civilization at this time was remarkably developed and sophisticated.
After 4 days of endless waiting, the refrigerated truck finally appears over the horizon. The excavations immediately start again.
Due to global warming, these are the last frozen tombs on the planet. The last frozen tombs on the planet.
This burial chamber was starting to melt.
We hope that we're going to find bodies between the ceiling and the floor that have been preserved by the ice. We'll know within an hour or two.
The Scythian burial chambers were constructed in the same way as they built their winter shelters. The huts are made of larch wood. It is capable of withstanding the rigors of the climate in the region. However, it has been covered in earth for the last millennia, and the wooden ceiling has become fragile over time and is starting to collapse. The archaeologists are losing hope.
I think it's hollow. But maybe I'll be disappointed. Can you see any ice?
There's some ice, but
not much. Well, we were hoping to find ice in this tomb, but there is only a small amount. It's still exciting because it is the first time that we've found a burial chamber that's completely intact. Apart from the ceiling, it has collapsed and this is causing problems. But all 4 sides of the hut have been preserved. And this is a first in Mongolia.
Their disappointment quickly evaporates because despite being partially collapsed, the burial chamber contains some remarkable treasures.
This is a large wooden tray.
It could be restored.
This tray has removable feet. It is a perfect example of Scythian craft. It has been adapted for a nomadic lifestyle. The Scythians were masters in making tools out of larch wood. It's difficult to carve, but it's very sturdy. These wooden artifacts have survived for over 2,000 years and have escaped putrefaction. They are extremely valuable. The Scythian objects were often gold-plated. They were extremely skilled goldsmiths. Gold was either made into sheets or scattered like petals on the floor of the burial chamber. This precious metal was very significant to them. Altai means golden mountain in Mongolian.
Gold is unalterable and is considered a noble metal form. Many people believe that it has symbolic links to the sun. We know that this was the case for the European Scythians because, according to the legend, the origin of the Scythians involves blazing gold falling from the sky. For the Scythians, gold symbolizes the power of the sun. They considered it to be metal of the sun. This is also the case in other cultures, such as the pre-Columbian civilizations, where gold was reserved for royals and the aristocracy.
Et à ce titre réservé au clan royal et à la haute aristocratie.
Ces deux loups.
He wore these two wolves on either side of his neck. The wolf has two heads, side by side. It's extraordinary. We can make out its head, its mouth, its teeth, its ears, and its neck. The gold leaf that covered it has become detached from the wood. Yesterday started with wolves howling throughout the night, and we saw them again during the day. The hunters pursued them, and now we've found symbolic wolves.
The wolf featured on the totem poles is the emblem of their clan. Scythian cultures were hierarchical. Each tribe had a leader, and the clans were often regrouped under one king.
It's got it? No. Show me.
This is part of a wooden quiver that would have been worn on the left thigh. It's from the ancient Greek classical age. They had leather pouches that contained both the bow and the arrows.
The recurve bow was the preferred weapon for the Scythians. It's small, but powerful. Kazakh arrows were mostly made out of bronze. They started using iron much later than their Western Scythian cousins.
According to Herodotus, the Scythians were mounted archers. They were invincible. Their battle strategy was based on the use of highly mobile forces that could pursue the enemy for hours. The populations that inhabited the steppe, and the people that live there today, employ the same combat tactics and rely on mounted archery.
They used short swords and pickaxes. There was no political unity between the Scythian groups, and there were frequent turf wars between the rival tribes. Only the arrival of a common enemy could unite these warrior populations.
Alexandre le Grand, en 331 avant Jésus-Christ.
In 331 BC, in his conquest of the Achaemenid Persian territories, Alexander the Great came up against the Scythian Sakha tribes from Central Asia. He attempted to oust them from their territory. The Macedonians launched an attack. However, the Scythians fought back and defended their region. It was one of the only times that the Macedonians were defeated. Alexander the Great drew back and left the area, having failed to conquer the terrain.
Alexandre est revenu malade de son expédition sans avoir pu ajouter ses territoires à son empire.
These are vertebrae. The poor child, he was so young.
The archaeologists have made an extraordinary discovery in the burial chamber. They have found 2 bodies underneath the collapsed ceiling, 1 adult and 1 child. The bodies have been placed on their sides, and they have been buried with weapons as well as other objects. The burial chamber is oriented on an east-west axis, following the sun cycle. This is symbolic of the cycle of birth and death. The most important person is always located at the furthest point south in the tomb. In this case, it is the adult. But why has he been buried with a child?
According to Herodotus, a child was sacrificed when a Scythian prince was buried. The body's not in great condition, so I don't think that we'll be able to tell if he'd had his throat cut. Also, there are a number of ways to kill someone, and it's not always possible to identify the cause of death, even for a pathologist.
The skeleton of the child has been affected by the partial collapse of the burial chamber, but the adult was protected by the wall and has been extremely well preserved. It looks as if it will be possible to perform a forensic analysis. The body is being transferred to the paleontology unit in the Raymond Poincaré Hospital in Garches, just outside of Paris.
The analysis of these remains plays an important part in our research because it gives us an idea about the life of the individual and, in particular, the way in which he died. The permafrost has caused an effect similar to mummification. A type of natural embalming has been caused by dehydration induced by the cold. A grey substance can be found on the surface of the bones, muscles and skin. It's a combination of dried muscle, skin and fat. Anomalies are visible on the upper limbs. It seems to suggest something called rider osteological syndrome. This is directly related to intense cavalry practice and indicates severe osteoarthritis. I have rarely seen such a severe case in a paleopathology unit. This is interesting. Here we can see traumatic injuries that occurred on fresh bones and therefore at the time of death. We can't see any traces of healing, and this means that the injury was the cause of death. It's a clear-cut wound and concentrated on one point. It looks as if it was caused by an arrowhead entry. This causes bleeding in the interior of the skull and in the brain, and a rapid death. There are indications of flesh having been torn off. It looks as if the head was scalped.
Herodotus wrote about the ritual embalming of Scythian leaders. They were scalped, and then their bodies were eviscerated and filled with herbs. This was necessary in winter, when it was impossible to dig graves in the frozen ground. The mummified bodies were stored for several months and presented to ally clans during transhumance. The bodies were then buried in the Surgal Valley, where they lived during the summer months. The first tomb proved to be a remarkable source of discovery. It has now been covered in order to maintain its original appearance. The team has moved on to a nearby tomb that has intrigued them since the start of the excavation. Traditionally, Pazyryk tombs were situated in rows, a few meters apart. Different generations were buried in rows heading from south to north. The second tomb is located further north than the tomb of the man and child. But why do the piles of stones overlap? Does this break from Scythian burial tradition have a special significance? It's proving twice as hard to dig out the second tomb. The archaeologists have been working in Surgal for 4 weeks, and it's imperative that they complete the excavation before weather conditions worsen.
C'est vraiment dur, vraiment dur.
The ground is extremely hard. We're 2,500 meters above sea level, at the highest point of Mongolia, far from the capital. It's always cold here, even during the summer. The conditions are tough.
The team wakes up to snow. Snowstorms come in frequently from Siberia at the end of summer. Despite the cold weather, the archaeologists managed to excavate the second burial chamber. The mystery surrounding the Surgal cemetery will finally be revealed.
We've discovered a sarcophagus that has been made out of a single section of wood. This is the first time in the history of Mongolian archaeology and conservation that something like this has been found.
The sarcophagus is intact and a horse is lying next to it. We're in suspense. I think we'll continue straight away, in spite of the snow. We mustn't let any moisture in.
We should cover it.
What with? With a sheet?
With a sheet.
The sarcophagus was dug out of the trunk of a large tree. This structure seems to have withstood the mound of earth that is covering it and is in better condition than the grave next to it. The efforts of the archaeologists are finally being rewarded. The sarcophagus seems to be intact. Once the sun reappears, the team will be able to determine how much information they can gather from this site.
We're going to remove some of the artifacts straight away.
A small wooden horse with 2 small horns.
Psychopomps are the creatures or deities that accompany the souls of the dead into the afterlife. In the Bronze Age, deer-like creatures represented psychopomps. However, when horses were discovered, they were considered more agile and therefore replaced deer as the symbol for a psychopomp. From then on, horses adorned with deer horns became an emblematic part of funeral ritual. Small animals were given 2 small horns to show they were perfect. The ceramic is broken.
This is the residue that was inside it. It was inside the pot.
You're a ceramic specialist, you can easily restore it.
The Pazyryks use mostly wooden tools, but they use ceramic utensils to cook their food. A biochemical analysis showed that this jar contained a lamb stew. The meat and fat had been cooked and then mixed with milk and vegetables. This preparation was then placed on a tray in the burial chamber to accompany the dead into the afterlife.
A small bronze knife.
Small knife.
Small symbolic knife.
Yes.
These are sheep bones.
This proves that they wanted to leave food with the dead so that when they came back to life, then they would have something to eat. It's amazing. It proves that they believed in the existence of another world. It's obvious.
It is generally thought that the Scythian religion, or should I say the Scythian religions, are based on Indo-European theological practice with the addition of shamanic rituals and traditions. They worshipped primordial deities, heaven and earth, and their warrior god was a solar deity. Also, like the shamans, they used psychotropic substances, in particular, hashish.
This fabric is extraordinary. It's huge. I think it will need to be taken to a laboratory in order to separate the different sections and restore the garment.
Christoph Mullera from the K. Braunley Museum has transported the Kazakh textiles to his laboratory. He is observing the fibers with an electron scanning microscope.
From the outset, we can identify scales. The fabric has been very well preserved in spite of the fact that it is 2,000 years old. Sheep's wool can be easily distinguished from other animal wool because it has very large scales. There's no doubt that this is sheep's wool.
This wool consists of a mixture of fibers of different sizes. This is characteristic of rural animals. Christoph Mullera compares his observations with samples of contemporary wool that he collected from Kazakh sheep.
It's fascinating. This sample has almost exactly the same variation of fiber sizes as the archaeological sample. Given the effort that has been made to homogenize wool fiber, it's remarkable to think that samples taken 200 years apart are so similar. Efforts have been made to eliminate large fibers because they don't take dye very well, and their size can often cause problems during the spinning process.
There are two possible explanations for this lack of evolution. The extreme cold conditions mean that the region is isolated, and interbreeding between different species is therefore limited. Also, nomadic populations often breed cashmere goats. They use cashmere wool when they need fine fibers. This has been the case since the Scythian period. The Kazakh capital fabrics have a remarkable thread density, and this makes them impenetrable and therefore waterproof.
We're hoping to find out more about the way in which they made these fabrics, because unfortunately, despite the number of graves that have been excavated and the number of everyday items that have been found, we have not found any weaving looms. We're hoping to find out more about the way in which the fabrics were produced. Simple technology can be used to make sophisticated fabrics. The word resilience keeps coming up. The resilient animals that were used, the materials, the techniques, the weaving, the spinning. It's extraordinary to think that these populations have used the same methods and way of handling animals for so many years.
The Kazakh lifestyle seems to be an extension of the way in which the nomadic Scythians lived. This resonance confirms the resilience of the steppe civilization.
The idea of combining ethnology and archaeology first came about 40, 50 years ago. Time is running out. Ethnological sources are disappearing. We're starting to see solar panels and satellite dishes on the yurts. They now have televisions. The modern world is entering the yurts, and they are shifting away from tradition.
La civilisation des steppes est apparue.
The steppe civilization appeared at the beginning of the first millennium BC. It still exists, but in a different form. The present-day nomadic populations on the steppe are impoverished, and their lifestyle is far removed from the glorious days of the Scythian period. Moreover, they are endangered and threatened by the state framework that is dictated by the sedentary populations, even in countries with nomadic origins, such as Mongolia and Kazakhstan.
The excavations are nearing completion. The ritual objects have been removed, and the archaeologists are now going to extract the body that rests inside the sarcophagus.
Tubat, do you think that this could be a hat?
A rather tall hat.
A very tall hat.
It's almost 50 centimeters tall, and it's beautifully decorated. It was probably only worn on ceremonial occasions.
It would have been impossible to wear it in daily life.
It wouldn't have been possible.
It wouldn't be possible to wear a hat that's 40 or 50 centimeters tall, especially when it's windy, that's for sure.
This is beautiful. It's gold. It's a woman's earring. This confirms that it's a woman.
The remaining tomb had a surprise in store. The body of a woman is lying at the heart of the sarcophagus. She was buried with various offerings to assist her passage into the afterlife. The ceremonial clothing and gold jewelry indicates that in addition to her role as a wife and mother, she held an important position in the social hierarchy of the clan.
The place of women in Scythian culture was different from their role in sedentary civilizations at that time. Women held a high status and often had important political roles. Women were leaders of tribes and queens of entire clans. They had weapons, and it's more than likely that they fought in battles.
She seems to have been injured by a blunt instrument that was destined to kill her. It looks as if it was forced into her skull. It's interesting. A collection of wounds has been made by a stabbing action. This part in particular is interesting. The wounds form a quadrangle. It's clear that she had already been injured when she was killed because she has old wounds. Her injuries seem to suggest that she was killed in battle and that her death was a prolonged affair.
These warlike nomadic women make me think of the Amazons in Greek mythology. It seems that in the 6th and 5th centuries BC, the Greeks based their mythical women on the Scythian warrior women.
Studies suggest that Scythian women were equal to men and that they had the same rights. They rode horses, they hunted, and they fought in wars. The mythology of Amazons can be linked to the historical reality of these warriors. They were different to the submissive women in Greece at that time. Hercules, Achilles, Theseus. The Greek heroes fought the Amazons and attacked the real-life image of the emancipated women Scythians.
We will ask an anthropologist to analyze whether she is of Caucasian origin, like the other members of the Pazyryk population. The first generation was Caucasian, and the population then interbred, and their children were half Caucasian and half Mongolian. We're going to do DNA tests.
Is there a genetic link between this woman and the man and child from the neighboring grave? DNA samples from 3 bodies were sent to Professor Krubez's laboratory. The results were unexpected and shed new light on the clan.
The results are interesting. The man and the woman are not the parents of the little girl. The woman and child have a slight genetic link. This suggests that they were distant relatives. This helps us to have a better understanding of the Altai populations. The woman and the child were of European origin, and the man was of Asian origin. During the Iron Age, the Asian and European populations became increasingly blended. It is believed that this happened gradually over time. There were many territorial battles during this period. It is thought that invasions and battles played a key role in the shift towards a non-European culture, imbued with Asian elements and defined by the human contact with other civilizations.
We noticed straight away that the 2 tombs had been placed very close to each other.
Yes, they're touching.
This doesn't prove anything, but it suggests that they lived alongside each other.
Tombs are usually separated from each other.
Yes, by at least 1, 2, or 3 meters.
These twin tombs in Surgal are linked for eternity. Their hidden treasures have been revealed, yet the precise nature of the relationship that united these 3 individuals remains a mystery. Did they belong to the same clan? Had they formed a family? Why have their graves been placed in a way that breaks with tradition? Where the archaeological research ends, it's up to our imagination to take over. These are the last known burial sites that can shed light on the Pasric culture. At the end of the 3rd century BC, groups of people from the east put an end to the Scythian domination on the Altai Mountains. The survivors were assimilated by the Mongolian invaders and forced westward. This movement gave rise to the barbarian invasions in the west and the fall of the Roman Empire. Successive nomadic populations have carried the steppe civilization and culture forward to the present day. The Scythian culture still survives, but its future now seems inexorably threatened.